You've advocated a hardline stance against North Korea, saying that a military option is needed in order to be successful in diplomacy. What would you advise President Trump to have in the cards for this summit?
Well, I don't know if we go to the summit if he needs to threaten military action or anything like that, but I think it's understood by Kim Jong-un, it's understood by China that we do have a military option, and I think indications I get is the president would be willing to use it, God forbid, if the only other option was North Korea getting a deliverable nuclear weapon that can hit us and our allies. And so I think just that knowing it's the stick that backs the diplomatic, so military backing the diplomatic instrument of power, which is why I think China basically talked to Kim Jong-un and said, the game's up, we need to get a deal here. And my hope is, and I'm looking at this soberly, but my hope is we can come out of this with a verifiable, significant denuclearization of North Korea.
Congressman, do you think that President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear disarmament deal in any way signals to North Korea that the U.S. might rip up the North Korea deal altogether should there be a denuclearization deal with North Korea?
I think it signals to North Korea that if they had any plan to create loopholes or say that they can ultimately nuclearize or say that there was some way that they could finagle, they can't do that because the president will negotiate an ironclad deal and he's willing to pull out of a bad one. So I actually think it sends a very strong message to Kim Jong-un that we need to just get this down, verifiable, and make it forever. And I think, looking at what's been going on and looking at these developments, I think it's sending a very strong message to the rest of the world that we're serious about the deals we want to engage in, and we'll do that.
How high are the stakes for President Trump, who sent his own Secretary of State to free these detainees? His meeting with Kim Jong-un, Mr. Pompeo saying the meeting could last even for more than a day. If the summit fails, will it fall all on President Trump?
No, I think the stakes are high. I think President Trump wants to get to a deal. I think it really is going to fall on Kim Jong-un and what he decides. Is he going to try to finagle and say, well, we want specters can't go here, but we want to be able to lift these sanctions in 2026 against nuclear, et cetera, then I think, it may fail. But if the president goes in and he says, look, let's have a verifiable deal, there may be a few carrots offered to North Korea, it can be successful. But walking away from a summit, keep in mind, President Reagan back in the Cold War had walked away from summits before only to come back to an ultimate good deal with the Soviet Union. And so it may be possible, but this is a long game. I do think if this fails ultimately, though, there's no higher negotiations that can occur. This is the apex of diplomacy, and so I fear what would happen if this does fail.
What about negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal? Because you've supported leaving the deal, but without an alternative mechanism, that void could be filled with more tensions. We have already seen Israel striking Iranian facilities. What do you make of that?
Well, Iran's not striking Israeli facilities because we pulled out of the deal. If you believe that, then you would have to think that about 3 days ago they sent 150,000 rockets to Israel, created the Hezbollah, sent the IRGC into Syria. This was all happening even before this president. I think what's happening right now is the Iranians thought that they could launch missiles at Israel and not get retaliated, and they got retaliated against. And so when the president pulled out of this deal, we put these arrows back in the quiver, these economic arrows, to say we're not just going to negotiate on the nuclear issue. We're going to negotiate on your broader behavior, including places like Syria, where there's 500,000 dead Syrians, mostly at the responsibility of Assad, Iran, and Russia.
That's such an important point, Congressman. And I think the question that I hear from so many folks here in Washington is what is the immediate next step for this administration in terms of trying to renegotiate some type of deal with Iran, particularly if our European allies are still engaged in that deal? So where does the administration directly go right from here?
Well, first off, the State Department has put out a list of how they're going to kind of wind up these sanctions. It's not going to be an immediate snapback. We're going to work with our allies to understand how it's going to impact them. And, our allies will have to decide what's more important, business with the United States or with Iran, and I know what they're going to choose. And then once that happens and the pressure is back on, I think at that point you go to the Iranians, if possible, if they're willing to negotiate, and you say, look, we're going to negotiate your nuclear weapon issue to a longer extent than we did and a more verifiable extent. And also the fact that you're backing a really evil person in Syria and threatening our ally in Israel, and we're not going to let you build this land bridge. So we've re-equipped basically our diplomatic and economic instrument of power, which we basically gave totally away. So I think actually, had we not done this, it actually would make military option more likely, because the only way we could confront Iranian behavior is through that and not economics.
That economic instrument of power, so crucial in terms of dealing with with Iran and Tehran. But I have a question in terms of where Russia and China in the energy sector might have some type of multilateral response in dealing with Iran. Is there any concern, Congressman, that this could actually force Russia and China to work together with regards to Iran and the energy sectors?
Yeah, look, there's always a concern, and I always say diplomacy is not a science, so you can't say this will happen, then this. It's human interactions. It's an art, and sometimes if you sit back and say we're risk averse to do anything, then bad things end up happening. So this is a bold step. Are Russia and China going to work together more? Maybe, but Russia's in a very bad position too. They have a declining economy. Even with oil prices up, they're not making the money to be able to support their social infrastructure, and frankly, I think they're kind of regretting being in the morass of Syria right now. So if they want to take on the West and the United States, that's their decision. But I think we can come at this with a much broader perspective and more powerful perspective than any of them have.
Congressman, analysts expect Iranian oil exports to get reduced only by about 200,000 to 300,000 barrels a day, which does not compare to the Obama times when it was cut by 1 million barrels a day or so. Do you expect more sanctions to be applied to Iran on top of just reimposing sanctions in order to be able to have some real outcome and effect?
I haven't seen that report, and I don't know what's in the pipeline, if that's accurate, 300,000. That's still a significant hit to an Iranian economy where the people in Iran are already upset that their government is spending too much money in Syria and not on them. We saw that in the protests of a few months ago. So that's a good impact, but I would expect that we would continue to see what can we do to ratchet down those Iranian oil exports, because keep in mind, the United States is picking up that slack right now. We're an energy powerhouse in the world, and so I think looking at this over the next 6 months, there'll be a lot of clarity as to what we're gonna do on the sanctions level.
What about gasoline prices? Because U.S. consumers have already felt the pain from rising gas prices. The midterms are coming. Is that something that you want?
No, of course not. I mean, we'd love gas to stay low, and this is why we continue to want to explore, to find new sources of oil. We want to make refining easier and better, even though that's been a bureaucratic and a regulation nightmare. And so that's what we're going to continue to do. But instability in the Middle East, that happens sometimes. Summer blend issues in Chicago, for instance, raises the price. And people feeling good about their pocketbooks and wanting to travel more raises demand. So this is kind of natural in this economy. We'll do everything we can to continue to keep gas prices affordable.